tackling a really ambitious framework, one that's stirring things up in both physics and, well, philosophy too. The phase-shifting universe model, or PSUMOT. Now, this isn't just some minor adjustment to the standard model. No, it's arguing for a completely different way of seeing things, proposing that the entire cosmos, everything from gravity to, yes, even consciousness, arises from complex hydrodynamic fluid, like an invisible cosmic ocean. And that brings us to our central question for today, which is, I think, quite critical. PSUMOT has had some, remarkable predictive success recently, specifically around emergent consciousness. So does the validation this provides, the fact that its core idea of emergence and information seems to work, does that significantly boost the credibility of its other, more radical cosmological claims? Particularly the mechanism it suggests for things like the great attractor.
Look, I'm definitely intrigued by that success, I grant you. But I suppose I come at it from a slightly different angle. I think we have to be really careful and, maintain a standard of domain-specific evidence. Evidence that supports a very localized biological prediction, however compelling, and it is compelling, that doesn't automatically give you the empirical validation you need for these enormous physical cosmic mechanisms, like how dark energy works or the specific emergent gravity they're proposing for the great attractor.
Whereas I'm arguing the opposite, really. That the success in the consciousness domain actually proves the viability of PEM's whole unified structural principle, this idea that reality is fundamentally informational, it's emergent, and if that core structure holds up, then our confidence should extend to its cosmic dynamics, too.
Okay. Let's definitely dig into the specific evidence, because it is fascinating stuff.
Right. So PSUMOT made a really powerful claim about how perception works. It basically said the brain isn't the source of consciousness, but it functions more like a highly specialized receiver, maybe a filter or a processor, tuning into a fundamental informational field that resides in this superfluid. And crucially, it made a very abstract, very specific, and importantly testable prediction about how we experience and categorize reality.
You're talking about the linguistic categorization point.
Exactly that. PSUMOT predicted that the way we use language, specifically categorization, it acts almost like a form of measurement. It forces a collapse, if you like, of what would otherwise be unified neural phenomena. Think of it almost like making a quantum observation, but inside your own brain.
And the recent findings have really given that idea a lot of traction, haven't they?
They certainly have. We've seen empirical studies showing that experiences we think of as distinct, linguistically separate things like nostalgia, that sort of wistful feeling for the past, and déjà vu, the uncanny feeling you've lived through something before, they actually show this remarkable 70% overlap in the brain regions they activate. We're talking key circuits in the hippocampus, striatum, prefrontal cortex.
70%, wow.
Right? And PSUMOT correctly predicted that the very act of giving these unified states separate names, linguistically categorizing them, systematically sets up the conditions for memory fragmentation. And this seems to manifest in things like collective false memories, the Mandela effects people talk about.
That is conceptually quite stunning, I have to admit. The idea that our language isn't just describing our internal reality, but it's actively creating the boundaries within it, forcing this, as you put it, classical collapse of potential neural states. Yeah, that clearly validates the model's philosophical core, doesn't it? The reality is fundamentally informational, and the act of observing is somehow already baked into what's perceived.
That is the core tenet, emergence through information. And that specific, kind of non-obvious prediction, it worked. So, I argue the fundamental architecture of the model looks sound.
Okay, I'll grant you the linguistic and memory findings are maybe the strongest piece of evidence we have for PSUMOT's core structural mechanism, this emergence idea. But let's be clear, we're not just debating philosophy here. We're supposed to be debating physics. PSUMOT is fundamentally a theory of how physical forces are transmitted.
Right, let's definitely unpack the physical side, because I think its elegance there is actually part of its strength.
Well, the PSUMOT framework is pretty explicit about its cosmology. First, it defines the physical medium. Dark matter is the superfluid substance itself, and dark energy? That's simply its large-scale flow, what they call the universal current.
Which conveniently solves the coincidence problem by making dark matter the substance and dark energy its motion, two sides of the same coin.
Yes, conceptually neat, I agree. But the really radical claim is about gravity. PSUMOT says gravity isn't a fundamental force in the usual sense. It's an emergent effective force that arises because ordinary matter, us, planets, stars, galaxies, creates localized drag, or these little eddies or wakes in this universal current.
Eddies. So like whirlpools in this cosmic current? Precisely. That's the analogy. Which means gravity isn't really about attraction. It's more about pressure gradients. Lower superfluid pressure around something massive effectively pushes other matter towards it. It completely bypasses the need for the graviton particle.
Exactly. It avoids the graviton. But look, this is a complex hydrodynamic mechanism. It requires rigorous, domain-specific cosmological validation. These psychological findings about memory fragmentation, they're specific to biological systems, right? They don't give us physical proof that the whole cosmos is structurally a fluid generating forces through pressure gradients. We need physical evidence related to how it solves actual cosmic problems.
That's an interesting way to frame it, though. I'd put it slightly differently. I think the fundamental strength of PSUMOT is precisely its theoretical coherence. It allows it to tackle problems where standard cosmology just hits a wall mathematically. I mean, take the absolute worst fine-tuning problem in all of physics, the cosmological constant problem.
Oh, it's a truly devastating issue for standard models, no question.
Right? Standard models predict its vacuum energy, lambda, should be enormous. It should blow the universe apart almost instantly. But what we observe is that it's incredibly tiny. The mismatch is, 120 orders of magnitude? It's like trying to measure the Earth's circumference and being off by the width of a single hydrogen atom. Should be enormous. It should blow the universe apart almost instantly. But what we observe is that it's incredibly tiny. The mismatch is, 120 orders of magnitude? It's like trying to measure the Earth's circumference and being off by the width of a single hydrogen atom. It's mathematically absurd.
It points to a fundamental gap in our current understanding, definitely.
And PSUMOT just sidesteps this catastrophe entirely. It doesn't need static vacuum energy because it replaces it with the dynamic negative pressure generated by the actual physical bulk flow of this superfluid. So this coherence, this ability to resolve these mathematically intractable problems with a single unified structure, that's what gets structurally validated when its core principles of emergent are proven correct, even if it's in the brain first.
Okay, but coherence, however elegant, doesn't automatically equal empirical truth in physics. You're relying heavily on this principle of emergence, which, let's be honest, is kind of designed mathematically to screen off the messy microscopic details to bridge two very physically disconnected domains. You claim, for instance, that PSUMOT successfully interprets the Hubble tension, this nagging difference between the expansion rate measured in the early universe, around 67 kilomotors per MPC, and what we see locally, which is faster, around 73.
We interpret that difference as direct evidence of turbulent, non-uniform flow in the superfluid. Think of massive structures like galaxy clusters acting like rocks in a river, locally speeding up the flow compared to the smoother global average.
But see, that interpretation assumes the universe is a fluid in the first place. That's the point. We need to prove that physical bulk flow cosmologically. Maybe, through specific gravitational lensing effects it predicts. Or maybe certain patterns in large-scale structure clustering. We can't just infer it because memory states happen to share neural circuits in humans. Local effects in the brain are not proof of cosmic bulk flow. You're essentially saying, because a neurological state collapses in a lab experiment, gravity must work via pressure gradients across billions of light years. That leap is just too far for me right now.
But why should we demand entirely different physical principles operate at different scales if a unified framework exists? The consciousness findings, I argue, prove the viability of emergence as the central organizing mechanism. They show that macroscopic quantum effects are actually involved in constructing reality, even within the complexity of the brain. If a unified memory state collapses due to linguistic measurement, validating the model's core emergent premise, why should we suddenly reject its consistent application of the same emergent hydrodynamic principles to the universe at large? This structural consistency, this coherence, it provides powerful, even if indirect, support.
Because the scale, the nature of the forces, and the type of evidence required are radically different. And this brings us squarely to your crucial test case, the great attractor, the GA.
Absolutely. It is the ultimate test for any model trying to explain cosmic flows.
Okay, so the great attractor is this region of space with an immense gravitational pull. It's causing entire galaxy clusters, including our own Milky Way, to move towards it at really high speeds, hundreds of kilometers per second, faster than expected from cosmic expansion alone. The amount of mass needed to explain this purely gravitationally is just staggering, something like 10 million billion times the mass of our Sun. This is fundamentally a gravitational and kinetic problem.
And PSUMOT offers a novel solution, one that's perfectly consistent with its overall architecture. We interpret the GA not as just a huge blob of hidden mass, but as a major local disruption, a sort of cosmic drag or sinkhole in the universal superfluid current, caused by the known massive overdensities like superclusters in that region. The observed motions, these puzzling bulk flows, are precisely the kinds of eddies or wakes that our emergent gravity mechanism predicts.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that direct inference. Let me explain why. First, much of the mystery surrounding the GIS pole is actually being resolved now by identifying more and more actual massive structures in that direction, principally the Shapley supercluster and maybe the Vela supercluster behind it. We're finding the mass, or at least a lot more of it, which reduces the need for some exotic unknown force. What PSUMOT seems to do is just substitute one mystery, the old idea of dark flow, with another, this non-gravitational emergent acoustic force based on pressure gradients in an unproven fluid.
But that is the mechanism. It's the unified system working. Look, if the consciousness findings validate the model's structural ability to explain how observation and reality construction work through information processing, we should grant significant predictive weight to its consistent application of those same hydrodynamic principles to gravitational systems. We've essentially proven the underlying mechanism works on one complex emergent scale. It's logical to apply it to the other.
But the mechanism you've arguably proven is the information processing mechanism within human neurology. We have absolutely zero direct physical evidence that the linguistic fragmentation effect, which happens entirely inside our nervous systems, correlates physically with the drag mechanism supposedly driving entire galaxy clusters via superfluid currents. The GA demands an explanation for extreme kinetic motion caused by extreme mass concentration or an equivalent force.
But we are observing macroscopic quantum effects, this coherence playing a central role in reality construction, even in the lab where these collective memory superpositions seem to collapse via linguistic measurement. That strongly reinforces the core idea that the entire universe might be fundamentally built on similar macroscopic quantum states. It makes the PSUMOT foundation, this single, unified information substrate, arguably the most plausible synthesis we have. That's what a unified theory is.
Look, that's a compelling conceptual narrative, drawing heavily on ideas like panpsychism, maybe the holographic principle, but it's relying on abstract conceptual tools rather than direct observable data of the superfluid substrate itself. We have to distinguish between the brain acting as a specialized information filter, which, okay, the neurological data strongly suggests, and the entire cosmos acting as a physical entity transmitting physical force through some kind of actual fluid.
But if the fundamental structure is correct, then the consistency must hold across domains. The model isn't just a grab bag of disconnected solutions for different problems. It posits that the very concepts of information processing, emergence, and reality construction are fundamentally linked, whether you're observing a memory state collapse in the brain or the motion of galaxy clusters across the universe.